So the second stone I'm loading on is somewhere in the neighborhood of a 600 grit. The usual progression for knife sharpening, if the knife isn't too far gone, is usually to start somewhere between 300 and 400. And then people often jump to 8, you can do 6, and then usually 8, and then finish at 1200. And you can go beyond that if you need to. I'm sort of adding maybe the 600 because it's a new edge, and I'm just going to manage that progression as best I can. But typically, you can maybe skip that if you're sort of getting a resharpening on a blade that already has an established profile to it. So I'm going to do the same motion, same degree, same action. What I'm going to try and do on this stone is try to raise the burr on one side of the knife, on the side I'm working on right now. I'm going to try and get it. I'm going to try and get it so that I can feel the burr on this side of the knife, and then I can work on the other side afterwards, both to get rid of it, but also meet the other side, hopefully in the middle. And then I'll be able to move on to the next stone. So I'm actually not entirely sure I've gone far enough with the first stone to do this. I might have to take this down to a lower grit again, but I felt pretty close. So I moved here. I'm going to work on it for a little bit. And you don't really want to go too quickly on this. You just kind of want to see what happens after a little bit of work. Now, I also know this steel is actually pretty hard. And I haven't worked with it a ton under the stones before. But this stone in particular feels good, but the steel feels pretty good on the stone as well. When you're working with multiple stones like I am, and you're a little bit lazy like I am, and you put them all in the same water, you want to watch you don't bring up too many contaminants. You want to wash the stone basically when you set it. In case sediment from other stones is on it, you just want to get that off. Normally you want to go further than that even. You kind of want to really be diligent about contamination and making sure that there isn't any from stone to stone. But in my case, that's really taking it to sort of a Japanese sword level, I guess, in terms of managing the process and watching for contamination. But I try to manage it at least a little bit. And you'll notice that there's actually one stone which is wrapped here that isn't in this container because it's my finest grit stone, and I absolutely don't want to mix that with anything. So I finished my knives on a stone that's a little bit unusual, but I'll get to that toward the end. I'm actually feeling a little bit of a burr, more in some places than others. Actually, I'm going to work on it a little bit here. I'm going to add a little bit of water. So I'm glad that I kind of feels like I got the stone order good on this steel in terms of establishing it, which is nice. I don't have to go back and forth too much. Okay, so I'm going to go at it from the other side. Juice up this stone again. And what I'm really doing is replicating what I did on that first side without going beyond it. As much as possible, I'm trying to envision this edge being matched in the middle at this point. Even though it's a razor blade, having that in your mind, for me anyway, it sort of helps with keeping this thing on the rails, because this is where precision starts to really matter. You want to have a good feel for it. Like I said, I know lots of guys that can do this a lot faster than I can, but if I want to do a good job, I kind of got to do it like this. And the stroke, it actually goes faster the further along you go with the stones. So, the less you let your edge come out of tune, the less time it takes to sharpen the knife. So to the people who own my knives, don't let it don't let it be years of hard use before, you know, it's still being able to cut, but you're not bringing up the edge anymore. You're making the knife work too much. You're making yourself work too much. Just, it's worth it. Learning how to do this, maybe, and you know, people will try to hone a lot. I'm not a huge fan of honing. I can probably explain that maybe as I do this. Honing is typically a rod, and you'll see a lot of chefs use it. And what they'll do is they'll usually have it kind of loose in both hands, like you would a helicopter, sort of running it like that. Looks cool, I guess, but it's very ineffective. What you're doing when you're actually honing a knife really is you're giving it a temporary, what feels like an improvement, but in the short/long run, what you're doing is you're reducing this bevel angle that I'm putting in 11 degrees. You're reducing it. You're making it more blunt. And so the more you hone, at a certain point, quickly, you'll get to a point where you can no longer really sharpen the knife. And honing, what it does really is creates quite a bit of work to resharpen it afterwards. It's just a lot easier to have, you know, a couple high grit stones and then just run the knives on that on occasion, or, you know, go further into it. But initially, that's all you kind of really need. I actually have it, so I have actually something else for customers who buy into it. But you can actually tune up a knife on strop with compound in it. So I'll show you guys what that looks like as well. So it's turning out pretty well, to be honest. Still some work to do. The reason I have the light here is because now I have a direct reflective light source, and that's just kind of helpful a little bit when I'm trying to see if there's any kind of reflection anywhere. And I'll be honest, there is, but it's probably mostly burr. So I'm going to work on it a little more, and then I actually might go up a stone. Now I'm hearing I'm feeling and hearing grit that doesn't belong on the stone actually at this point. So I'm going to wipe it clean. I actually think I may have transferred it from my flattening platen right here. So I'm just going to work this a little bit. This is still the 400 platen. I actually have a higher grit one, but I don't really need it right now. This works pretty well, pretty quick, which is nice, and that's about as even section as I'm ever going to get with that. Perfect. So I think I may have contaminated earlier exactly what I was preaching about. So this knife looks like I got a bit of a burr on one side, but I'm going to keep working it. Okay. Really want to work this heel here. I don't want it to be the forgotten part of the knife. I'm still feeling a little bit of grit from some cross contamination. So, you know, maybe I should maybe I should go back to my old ways and keep things separate a little more. When I was in Japan, I was exposed to some Japanese sword polishers in their shops, watching them do their work. It's pretty interesting. Like, you know, I learned a little bit and practiced some. What, you know, it's mostly known as like a swordsmith's polish, because I hung out with swordsmiths more than anything. But the sword polishers, the way they, you know, what you can read from their stones in terms of how they use them, how they maintain them, how they're classified, how they're used. It's just such a deep well. And that's why it's a specialty, you know, when you get to polishing on stones like this, it's really an art. That's not what this is. I'm putting an edge on a knife, but like anything, it can be taken to great heights. And Japanese sword polishers surely did that. They still do it today. I've spent time with them. I've frequented their stores where they purchase product, which is where I've gotten some of this. It's a whole industry. It's quite interesting, but quite requires a certain personality, a certain, I feel like almost an engineer's mind would potentially be attracted to this as an art. I'm more of a fire lover. I like working at the forge too much to be a sharpener or a polisher. But I certainly learned quite a bit from them, at least enough to do this. Like I said, this, you can sort of feel it, both with the way the knife sits and how it's riding on the rock or on the stone, and just by the feedback you're getting from the noise. You're still hearing it's a little bit gritty, which shouldn't be. So I'm going to wipe that down a little bit. I think it's actually maybe less cross-contamination and more, I haven't used this stone in a while, so I think it might be a little brittle. And I think it's, some of that slurry is maybe a little crunchy, but it's still doing a good enough job at this stage, and that's all I need it for. When you're working with stones like this, you know, they require their own sort of, you know, section, at least in your shop, both to be maintained properly and used properly. Otherwise, you know, it's good to recognize this for what it is and how difficult it is to do well. And if you know a good sharpener, man, just bring it to him. You know, I'm just thinking back. I just realized my shoulder was tense there, and that one of the goals is to really try not to be tense in your body when you're doing this stuff, because it just sort of impedes motion a little bit more than you want it to. So being able to relax while you're doing this kind of work is usually key. It's actually pretty well key in most of the steps that you'll sort of work at, both to prevent fatigue and also to reduce the chance of injury and a bunch of other reasons. But it also helps your technique, importantly, I guess. It's the main reason we do this, right? It's to get good at it. So I feel like I'm pretty well done with this stone. I've got zero reflection at the edge now. So this edge is good and sharp. Got a little bit of a burr, which I'll sort of tackle and finish off on one side. But yeah, so far so good. And I just actually felt the burr come off there, so that was perfect. Don't know if I'll need to work it any more than that, really. Nope, doesn't look like I will. Maybe right at the tip. Yep. So I'm just looking to remove the burr before I move on to the next stone. Yeah, perfect. So the burr was actually there was no flat of the burr because it's curled over. That's what was reflecting back at me, and which it's no longer doing because the burr's gone. So I get to move on to the next stone. Thanks for watching a video. If you have any interest in seeing more, you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I'm even on Twitter. If you have an interest in maybe getting a knife yourself, by all means go to the website and stay tuned for more.